At our previous church that we were a part of and had the privilege of leading, we connected with a recovery program that was just in its beginning stages called Sober Soldiers. And of the two main guys who were starting this recovery program, one of them was a believer and the other one was an atheist. And the atheist's name was Cody. And in a conversation with Cody one day, we would talk often discussing the idea of higher power. If you're familiar at all with AA groups or Alcoholics Anonymous or any of the 12-step program, the second step involves coming to a belief that there is a higher power that will help you keep your sobriety. Because it's this idea that you cannot recover on your own. You need something to believe in that's bigger than yourself. And so at this point, Cody's trying to reconcile his disbelief in God and everything he's heard about that and his desire to believe in something bigger than himself so that he could fight for his sobriety. And he's a pretty deep thinker. You're going to be able to meet him in a few weeks. They're going to come visit. But he's pretty philosophical. He just loves to think deep and have the kind of crazy conversations about anything. And I always enjoyed those conversations. And one time we were just discussing nature. And I love being in nature. I love just getting out there in it. We were talking about why are we attracted to nature? What's out there that makes us want to be there and to see those things? And we started talking about, in some ways it's cool because it reminds you just how small you are. Right? Nature's just so big. You're on, tops of mountains or looking over the ocean, all these things. It just makes you feel small. It reminds you there's something bigger than you going on. And I began to discuss how that points me to God. Right? Psalm 19, 1-4 says, "The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone throughout the earth and their words to all the world." Right? Nature exists to bring people to God. It is something that points to something bigger and higher. And as we've talked, and he's a believer now, and we discussed all these things, it was one of that idea of the higher power of nature that led him to the existence of God. Tyler Staton, in the book that we're using for this series, Praying Like Monks and Living Like Fools, shares a similar story of a man that was helping an unbeliever understand that same second step of needing a higher power. Now, this man who was wrestling with the desire in the same way to live a sober life, but not wanting to believe in a God he really didn't believe in. He was explaining his predicament, and he said, "Here's the deal. I want to get sober. I'm committed to the program, but I'm out on God. Right? Don't misunderstand me. I'm for everything else, but please don't try to talk me into some cosmic therapist to help me say no thanks to alcohol." Now, when I read that, I think that's a pretty fair summary of how a lot of people feel about prayer. Right? I can just get through life on my own. I don't need some crazy divine being out there to tell me and help me get through this stuff. I don't even know if I believe in that. As of late, there's been this renaissance, this upbringing of Eastern spiritual practices in our modern West world, especially, the really educated areas, practices like Buddhist mindfulness or meditative emptiness. The things that try and get people to that elusive, centered state of enlightenment. Steve-O, who's one of the stars from the TV show and the movies Jackass, if you've watched that before, but he's known for doing all of these crazy, crazy things, like some of the legit craziest things on earth. He found his sobriety and the higher power through meditation, right? And that's how popular that type of stuff is in the world. And I think most people are okay with prayer in that aspect of trying to empty themselves and come to a centered state. But the idea, Zen. But the idea of prayer being actual communication with some divine being, this divine being that is intelligent enough to create you and me and everything we know and everything that we experience, that's a little bit out there. So this AA leader picks up this man who's struggling. He takes him to the ocean, and they're sitting at the beach and overlooking the ocean. And it goes out as far as it can see to where the blue-gray sky starts blending with the blue-gray water, and you can't really quite tell where the horizon is. It just seems to go on forever, which it doesn't because the earth is flat. Okay, I'm just kidding. This is not one of those things. All right, and but they're looking out there, and the leader breaks the silence with the question, do you see anything more powerful than you are? And the man nods his head, and he says, then start here. Start there. We're in our series Prayer, an invitation into the mystery and the wonder of prayer. Last week, we talked about where to start with prayer. And if you missed that message, man, I would highly recommend going back to it and listening. But the basics from that is there are plenty of reasons why people don't pray, right? And a lot of them have to do with fear and worry and anxiety. But the place to overcome that is in prayer, by an encounter with God and realizing how much he loves and cares about you. And we ended that service with a time of application. And we learned to pray as you can and not pray as you can't. Because that's the starting place. Have you ever had an encounter in life where you saw things more powerful than yourself? Right? Maybe it's just walking out these doors and looking at the mountains that are right outside our doors, or maybe a visit to the ocean with your kids and you see the waves coming in and just crashing over people. Maybe you've been in the wave that's crashed over you and not even sure if you're coming out. Maybe it was a hurricane, that we just recently had. Maybe it's when you lay out at night in the dark and you look up into space and you just see how far it goes and how big it is. Right? Maybe it was the solar eclipse that we watched a few years ago. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was crazy. Basically, like everywhere stopped to just look at this crazy event of the moon passing in front of the sun during the day. And maybe it's looking out an airplane window and just seeing everything so tiny down below you. When we have those types of feelings, it's a glimpse into God's perspective. The author Philip Yancey wrote, prayer is the act of seeing reality from God's point of view. See, prayer doesn't begin with us. It begins with God. It doesn't start with us speaking. It starts with us just seeing. Before we even open our lips and say a single word to God, we have to discover the right posture to walk into prayer. And so that's what we're going to talk today about, the posture. Last week we talked about pray as you can, not as you can't, all right? Because we need to start somewhere. Now, the rest of this series is going to be really practical tips on how to enter into prayer and how to make it something that's daily in your life. But this prayer posture that we start with today is going to set the foundation for a really healthy and beautiful prayer life. It is the entrance into the wonder of prayer. And we're going to look at David from the Old Testament as an example in our guide in prayer today, because David has more prayers recorded in the Bible than anybody else by far. Our main verse will be from Psalm 46 today, and it's a psalm attributed to the sons of Korah, which this was a group that David put together to run day and night prayer in the temple. Right? He trained them up. He said, this is how we're going to do it. These are all the things I know about prayer. And then they spent day and night time in prayer. And this is a psalm that they wrote. And in verse 10, it says, be still and know that I am God. We're going to start with just that first little phrase, be still. It sounds pretty simple and easy, just like last week's verse of don't be anxious, but pray about everything, get peace. Right? Nice, simple 3-step. This is 2-step, but not the dance. Okay. I was going to dance there. I don't even know what I'm doing. It's just going to look like a fool. But be still. The problem is the world we live in is made it impossible to be still. Right? The world did not used to be as hectic and as hurried as it is today. Right? I can even remember growing up not that long ago. I did just turn 35, and I'm struggling with this am I old now? I'm closer to 40 than 20. And, but I just spent a week with one of my best friends, and he's the same age as me. We were looking back at pictures from our trip, and he was like, when did I get so old? When did I turn into a man? Something instead of just this teenager, young adult type person. And I said, well, I'm glad that only happened to you. But I remember, though, in my childhood when things weren't open 24 hours. We were discussing, back when you were a kid and you would go on a vacation, you couldn't just stop and get gas whenever. You had to make sure you made it there before the gas station closed. And, how that's such a weird concept in our minds now. And most things were closed on Sundays. And on those days or at those times in the evenings, like the world was little bit more quiet, a little bit more calm. Traffic had, kind of ceased besides just people headed out to go do some fun. There was no industrial noise, right? The hustle and bustle of life seemed to not exist. But if you go even way farther back than my 35 years of life, there was a time where there was even more calm and stillness abounded. I think we got a small feel for it during COVID of what life unhurried kind of looks like. And honestly, I believe that's where a lot of the anxiety came from, is that we don't remember how to be still. There were 3 inventions that changed the world into what we have today. In 1370, the first of these inventions was introduced into the public sphere, and it was a public clock, a big clock tower put up in Germany. And historians say that was the moment of a turning point of us moving from natural rhythms of time to artificial time. Before this, the world woke up with the sun and went to bed with the sun setting. Right? And it led to a natural rhythm of life where there were seasons of more rest because the sun was out for a lot less time, and times of getting to work a little bit harder. Now, the introduction of the clock shifted our time from being a limit that governed our time and our lives to a resource used for our agendas. Right? In 1879, 500 some years later, the next thing was invented, and that was the light bulb, which among many things, it cut into our sleep. Right? Prior to the light bulb, the average American slept 10 hours a night. Right? Who got 10 hours of sleep this past week? Right? Isn't that crazy? Yeah, there's some teenagers in here. Yeah. But the light bulb increased human productivity because now we could work at all hours of the day. In less than 100 years following that, we added air conditioning and central heat, so now we could work no matter what the weather. We also had microwaves, dishwashers, and laundry machines, and all these other conveniences come into place. Sociologists began to look around. This is crazy, I think in 1967. They began to look at where the direction of human life was headed with all these advancements of technology. And they did a study in 1967. And the general consensus is that the more we head into the future, the less work people would do and the more leisure time they would have. Right? Listen to this. They thought by 1985, the average American would work 22 hours a week. Right? Man, if only, right? But listen to this. You would only work 27 weeks out of the year. Right? Because that's what the technology we were creating was supposed to do. In reality, people have actually continued to spend less time on leisure since the 80s. Technology has continued to advance to save us time. Like, we got that part of the equation right. But what we misjudged is how people would use that extra time. Right? We begin to use it to fulfill desires on our own because we thought we have this extra time. I could put in a little bit more work. I could get above and beyond what other people are doing or get this or that, instead of realizing that overall, main command of our life was to be still, to know God. But there was a third invention that's made it even harder for all of us. And we've talked about this before, but in 2007, do you know what was released? The iPhone. Over the years, they began tracking the average amount of use. In 2016, this is just iPhone user, like average, Android, I assume, is probably more time on it because it doesn't work as well. But now in 2016, the average iPhone user touched their phone, like picked it up out of their pocket or picked it up off a table, 2,617 times a day. And that averaged to 2.5 hours of screen time. By 2019, that figure has more than doubled to an average of over 5 hours a day. And guess what? In 2023, we haven't got better. We're now at 6.5 hours a day on average of screen time for your phone alone. That's roughly 40% of an average person's day awake. Instead of slowing down and harnessing technology to free up leisure time, we now suffer from what mental health professionals call hurry sickness. It's a behavioral pattern characterized by the continual rushing and anxiety. In a society that prizes efficiency and productivity above everything else, that uses time as a tool instead of a limit. Hurry isn't just an occasional necessity, it's become our new normal. But be still is not as simple as it sounds. The Christian philosopher Dallas Willard was once asked, "What do I need to be spiritually healthy?" And after a long pause, he offered the now famous response, "You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life." Isn't that crazy that of all like the spiritual things that someone would say to do, it wasn't you need to spend more time in prayer. It wasn't that you need to read the Bible more or worship more or get to church more often. It was that you need to get rid of hurry in your life because it's keeping you from everything. According to Willard, hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. There was a 5-year study done not too long ago over 20,000 Christians in the U.S., and it identified that busyness is the number one distraction from a life with God. This is the summary. It says, it may be the case that Christians are assimilating to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, which leads to God becoming more marginalized in Christian lives, which leads to a deteriorating relationship with God, which leads to Christians becoming even more vulnerable to adopting secular assumptions about how to live, which leads to more conformity to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload. And then the cycle begins again. Right, there's kind of a lot of words in there. So to simplify that cycle was that we become too busy with life, that there isn't room or time for God, which leads to us putting less importance on our relationship with God. So then we're being influenced by the world, which leads us to be more busy. Right, wash, rinse, repeat. Does that cycle kind of sound familiar in your life? Have there ever been moments where you thought you were doing well, and then all of a sudden you blink and you're like, whoa, how did I get all the way back over here? Carl Jung, whose research is the basis of the Myers-Briggs personality test, he put it bluntly, hurry is not of the devil, it is the devil. Right? We like to blame our environment, for the complexity and for the busyness of our lives. Right, like the pace of the activities in our cities or the workload or the office culture that we are involved in. Or maybe it's our stage in life. The current demands on our time and, those are all the things that are ruling my life, my overwhelmed life. And busyness has now become a level like of a status. We talked about this, months ago, that busyness is like what you want to tell people when they ask how you're doing. Right? Like, how have things been? Oh, they've been busy. Right? Because I am so important. I have so many things going on. You know how much I don't even sleep? Right? Like, it's a crazy thing to brag about, that's become our level of a status in life, is that I'm so busy to not even take care of the things I like, do the things I like, take care of myself, all this stuff, and people are like, oh, that is so awesome. So good for you. But that studies show that things are quite the opposite, that your inner life is not a reflection or a mirror image of your environment. It's actually the other way around. That when the environment that you put yourself in is a mirror image of what's actually going on inside of you. Right? When you are overwhelmed, your life on the outside is overwhelmed. When you are trying to avoid thinking about things and you're staying busy on the inside, right, then your life looks busy and cluttered on the outside. I really wanted to do this series earlier this year. For whatever reason, it just didn't fit in until now. But now I look back at what God has taken us through on this journey for this year, and I realize that we needed our last sermon on the series of the Mount before this, because we need to understand that the kingdom of heaven doesn't look like the kingdom of earth. Right? We got to understand that Jesus spoke about prayer. The Lord's Prayer is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount because people wouldn't understand prayer without realizing that God's kingdom doesn't look like our earth. I'm sure that the sons of Korah, when writing Psalm 46, wanted us to be like mentally and emotionally healthy. But what's really at stake isn't just our ability to stay centered. It wasn't just like, you need to be still, find your zen. Like that was not their intentions for writing that. When this psalm urges us to be still, it's not pushing us towards a self-care retreat. It's undermining an ancient conspiracy that's been around from the beginning of time. Right? When Adam and Eve took the forbidden fruit from that one forbidden tree, they sinned. And then they hid, they were making clothes, they were arguing, they were blaming each other. They dealt with their sin through hurry and busyness and muchness and manyness. And ever since then, we've always found it easiest to just ignore the truth as long as we just don't stop moving. Right? In the fall of humanity, we've mastered the art of hurry. It was actually part of the curse put on Adam and Eve when they were kicked out of the garden, was that work was going to be harder. It's going to take much more time. It's going to involve more of your life. And so now we have to fight for a balance with God. Now there's so many promises, and that's what most of these points on prayer are going to be, is that if we could get back to our focus on God, that curse disappears out of our life. You are so much more productive in being still with God than you are being busy or trying to add more stuff to your schedule. So what happens, though, is we end up as good people, right? We're people who are not very deep. We're not bad. We're just busy. Like, we're not immoral. We're not out doing all these crazy things. We're just distracted, right? We're not lacking in soul. We still have character and personality, but we're just preoccupied with something else. It's not that we don't want depth in our life. We're just not doing the things that would get us there. And so then that leads us to trying to import prayer into our hurried lives. It's kind of like treating the symptoms instead of doing the full detox. And the result is that most of us just live lip service to God when it comes to prayer, while effortlessly conforming to culture. Maybe the one true God we are actually worshiping when we look at our lives. Now, if anyone knows this, it's me. I'm not putting this out here to say, look how rough you guys are over there. I avoid everything in my life that could cause pain or make me uncomfortable by just staying busier. There's multiple times that I've gone through hardships in my life, and I just I don't really want to feel those feelings. I don't really want to deal with what that is. So I'm just going to stay really, really, really busy till I just pass out from exhaustion. And then I'm going to set my alarm super early so that I can get back up before I even start thinking and get back to work. Right? And sometimes that work is good work, whether I'm working for a church or I'm out doing stuff in the community. But when I'm avoiding being still with God, I'm missing out on the best work. Right? This is a trap I regularly fall into. Like I said, it's been a pattern of my life and something that I'm trying to change. And this book, why we're going through it, is because at the beginning of this year, I read this book and it challenged me to my core of who I am as a person, that I have not been doing things right. Right? And this is something that I'm continuously fighting to continue to make time for in my life right now. I try and make it the first thing that I wake up to do. I don't put a specific time frame on it because I don't want to say I'm too busy to only give you this much time. And so sometimes that means waking up even earlier because I know I have things to get to. I've also had to put aside other things that I feel are very important because I don't feel like I have time for it, and I don't want my life to be so hurried that I choose to put this aside. But it's kind of changed everything for me. This is a challenging year for us. Some of you guys know, and some of you don't, that we moved here just over a year ago, and transitioning here is not always the easiest thing on our kids, and trying to walk them through all the new things and why we're here, why God called us here, and then on top of that, just being humans that have our own struggles, and then marriage issues, because again, we're just humans, and just chaos of life happening around us. But for some reason, I could make it work better in my brain if I spent more time trying to fix all the things. But what I've come to realize through this year, and I believe why God led me to this book at the beginning of the year, is I wouldn't have been able to handle it without him and without setting aside that time and being still with him. Now, it's not easy. I have not been perfect at it by any means. More often than not, I have not given back into the world of hurriness, but I have found myself sliding back into that cycle at times. Now, I also know how important all of you are, right? You got a ton going on at work and in your families. You have all the demands at home, all the people that depend on you. You probably have a Netflix queue that needs some attention. Your social media personality that the world needs out there, because without it, people will be lost. But let me remind you that the sons of Korah who wrote this psalm, they learned it from King David. Now, David wasn't just David, he was King David. He was over an entire nation in the middle of war. Right? When I go to bed worried about things, it's like, I'm worried about whether I'm not going to get all my tasks done this week, or how my kids are going to do at school, or maybe, the bills that are upcoming. David went to bed wondering if his nation was going to be attacked. If his friends that he fought with on the front lines of the battle who were out there were going to make it through the night. That the kingdom, that all of these people put their responsibility, their weight onto him and his decisions. Like weighed on him, yet King David still found time to be still. Right? That's why he had so many psalms written. I think came out of his moments of stillness. It was the written records of his prayers after he just sat before God and said, God, I see from your perspective, but I don't know how to handle that today. Or, man, you're so good. When David was still, allowed him to see life from God's perspective. See, now the term be still in the Latin is the word vacate, where we get the word vacation from. Right? The invitation of prayer anytime and anywhere is that we get to take a vacation. To vacate from the busyness of life, to take a vacation from playing God of your own life and just sit back with a God who is actually in control. Right? Sometimes on vacations, like real vacations, like I just don't want to make decisions. I make a lot of decisions in my world that I live in, and like sometimes a vacation for me is just to be in a place where decisions aren't made for me, where I can just sit back and just let life happen. And that's really what prayer is supposed to be, a moment where you step back and realize, I'm not even in control of my life. I just want to hang out with the guy who is. And I'd probably trust him more if I spent a little more time with him, if I understood his heart for me and how much he loved me. I'd be totally fine with letting him be in control. I let my wife make decisions for me. Why would I not be okay with letting God make the decisions for me? And that's the start of this, to be still. But the next part of that verse says, and know God. I remember that story at the beginning of focusing on your higher power, something bigger than yourself. So you and I, as humans, we see the world through our two eyes. We can only look this direction. We can kind of remember the past, but we can't see into the future. We're stuck in just our perspective bubble that exists around us. And from that minuscule perspective, we tend to kind of convince ourselves that we are, or, we should be in control. It's my life. I'm in control of it. That we should be scripting our future. But we have to remember that we aren't the center of the universe. Sorry to break it to you. Psalm 8 is a really helpful place. It's a prayer of David, Psalm 3-4, and it says, when I look at the night sky, and when I see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set into place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them? Human beings that you should care about them. We tend to think of ourselves as such a large part of the universe. In reality, we're very, very, very small. Did you guys know that there are 2 Voyager spacecrafts that they launched years ago just to go as far as they can into space? And they send back random info, and it's very limited info because it's old technology. And they travel roughly at the speed of 35,000 miles per hour. Have you guys ever been that fast? I'm just kidding. But it only took them 35 years to reach interstellar space, or what is considered the end of our solar system. It's where our sun stops affecting the atmosphere out there. 35 years at 35,000 miles per hour to reach the edge of just our solar system. What's crazy is they're trying to figure out how long it'll take for it to become closer to another star than our sun. Right, so this is the goal, right? This next goal that they're trying to calculate is when does it reach just past halfway point between our sun and the next star in the universe out there? And do you know how long it's going to take? How many more years? 40,000 years. I look back over the numbers, 40,000 times because I'm like, there's no way that can be true. That is such a, like, I can't even begin to wrap my head around how enormous that is. I can't even wrap my head around going 35,000 miles per hour, let alone that going for 40,000 years. And that's not even the end of the universe. That's halfway to the next closest thing like us. God is so big. Right? Psalm 33:6 says that the Lord merely spoke and the heavens were created. He breathed the word and all of the stars were born. Right? This universe that is going to take us like many, 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 many lifetimes to even explore a still very, very, very small fraction of. God just was like, let's make some heavens. He sneezed and some stars came out. Like he breathes out stars. That's crazy, right? But somehow we like to go, the world really should function from my perspective. Like, how ridiculous of a statement. Right? Like, we don't even understand most of what's happening in the universe, let alone say we should be the ones that know and are in control. But that same God that is so huge and so powerful wants to commune with you. And that's why David says, why us, these mere mortals? Why are you even mindful of us? Why are we even on your radar? That thought alone should bring you to stillness. The great scandal, right? The most important work of prayer is simply to let ourselves be loved by God. Right, what started with Adam and Eve, the beginning of busyness and hurriness never stopped. It continued to the Tower of Babel, a group of people who thought, I'm going to get to heaven myself and build this giant tower. Right, King Saul, who thought, I can do this thing. I don't need to listen to how God told me to do it. To the Pharisees, to the CEOs today, and to me. We are all prone to drown out our view of God, to keep moving and to go about our lives as if we are the center. Now, stillness is the quiet place where God migrates from the periphery back to the center. Right? Prayer pours forth from the life that God has at the center. To really know God, we have to begin to realize the limits of ourselves. We need to know ourselves. Multiple times throughout the Psalms, David prays about this specific topic. In Psalm 146, 3-5, he says, don't put your confidence in powerful people. There is no help for you there. When they breathe their last, they will return to the earth, and all their plans die with them. But joyful are those who have the God of Israel as their helper, whose hope is in the Lord their God. Another time in Psalm 39, David prays about himself. He says, Lord, remind me how brief my time on earth will be. Remind me that my days are numbered, how fleeting my life is. You have made my life no longer than the width of my hand. My entire lifetime is just a moment to you. At best, each of us, but a breath. We are merely moving shadows. All of our busy rushing ends in nothing. We heap up wealth, not knowing who will spend it. And so, Lord, where do I put my hope? My only hope is in you. Sometimes we read these types, he uses this topic of death other times as well. And sometimes we read this as self-deprecating or that he's depressed. But David is pointing out this self-aware victory over the lie that has continued to be whispered from the very, very beginning. Right before Adam and Eve sinned, they were led to it by the whisper that you will not certainly die. And that very lie continues to wreak havoc on our lives today. We live in constant noise. We forget our mortality. We forget that we are not eternal beings in this life on earth. If you live like this world and this life is all you've got, you'll lose yourself in trying to be everything for everyone. Pretending that you are eternal is a miserable, dehumanizing life. It was the original lie. We never tire of believing it, and we never fail to lose ourselves in that. When you see how great God is and how fragile and fleeting we are, you equally see how profoundly you matter to God. The Creator has time for you. of everything he could spend time with, of everything that he wants to do, and he knows that you're just a moment on this earth, he puts aside time to be with you, to meet with you in prayer. And why could we not put aside a fraction of our time to be with him? It's the only time we can experience God in this way on earth. Be still and know that I am God. Right? Slow down. Remember who God really is. Remember who you really are. That is prayer. Right? We are eternal beings in the fact that, because of what Jesus has done for us, he's given us life abundantly all the way through. But we don't live in eternity until we are connected to the kingdom. And I believe that being still is the entrance into that kingdom, like the key. Right? I don't know, I kind of picture when I take my moment to be still in the morning, it's like I walk through the wardrobe and into Narnia. Right? It's a little ridiculous, but that picture is so beautiful. Because God has this whole other kingdom and world for you that has so much more to offer you. And all you have to do is step into the wardrobe. All you have to do is step into a moment of being still. When we can stop, when we can put the rest of the world on hold and come to God and walk into that kingdom that Jesus preached about, the kingdom of eternity, it changes things in you. When you look through the Gospels, you see Jesus being intentional about getting away with God. He slows down his life and he separates and he gets still with God, of slowing down, of stopping and pausing. But this also transformed his physical life. Jesus paused not just to be alone with God, but to be interrupted by opportunities to love. When you live an unhurried life and you build that pace off of God, it'll transform you beyond your prayer time. And when you realize how much God loves you, you see how much he loves others. And when you see that God can make time for you, it's pretty easy to make time for others. Stillness before God transforms us into an unhurried love. It is in the stillness of silent prayer that God turns over the soil of our hearts, revealing our desires to us and the source of our fullest satisfaction. When we stop moving, when we stop talking and arrive present and quiet before God, he takes away all of our distorted desires, our distorted attachments and our codependencies, and he transforms them into the one true connection, the source of life that we do have. Psalm 46:10 doesn't end with, be still and know that I am God. It continues. It says, be still and know that I am God, and I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So be still. Let go of the anxiety. Lay down your burdens. Take a rest for your soul, a vacation. And then God will be exalted in the earth. Right? That's the destination of this prayer. The promise that we become fully aware of who God is. God's presence becomes reality in the moments that we are still and just connect with him and become aware of him. The word exalted literally means to lift up above so that other people can see it. Simba was exalted. But that's what it means, is so that everybody could see him. And when we actually still our lives, instead of adding another thing to do, God is seen in that. He is made visible. He is lifted up. It means love breaks out everywhere that there is hate. Right? That kindness begins flooding away competition. Peace swallows up fear. Joy washes over jealousy. And self-control calms rage. Here is the way that God promises to get all of that done. To be still and know that he is God. Right? Be still. Remember who God is. Remember who you are in the picture. And then do your best to live without changing up that order. And then that's where your life starts changing. In just a moment, we're going to practice this. And we'll talk about a little bit of some helpful tips in practicing this time. But I talked briefly on this last week, but this is become such a source of life for me. I know that just in the few moments that I sit in silence with God every morning, that's where I've been able to survive the life that's in front of me. And not that I have some crazy hard life or anything, but just as we all do, we get flooded with the opposites of the fruit of the Spirit, right? We have moments where we don't feel love, or we don't feel joy, or we don't have peace, or we don't have patience. But literally, when I sit in that moment of silence with God, I feel like those things just flood into me. And I can't really explain how it all works because this is like, God's a little bit bigger than me, as we discussed. But what I do know is that it's true. And I do know that I want to be here today the way I am without those moments. And I do know that the days I don't do that moment, that I really wish I had. And that I'd stop wherever I'm at and just do it because it changes things. And so I don't just walk away from here today because that's a nice practical way to connect in prayer to God. No, let it change your life. This is not just some thing. It's so much deeper than that. I don't want to see you go living life without this. Once you taste it, once you've experienced it, you won't want to live life without it. All right, so how do we practice this being still? And first I want you to know, it's just a moment of just sitting in silence, okay? And I don't want you to confuse that time of sitting in silence as waiting for revelation from the Lord, right? You may end your time of silence and feel like literally nothing happened. I didn't hear God speak. I had no visions. I don't feel like my life was all fluffed up today, or anything. Is just sitting still is the accomplishment. Right? It's consenting to the work of God's Spirit. Because it's not something that happens physically. Right? It's a soul connection. It's a spiritual thing. It's not something we can do, and so you can't say, aha, I've arrived. Because it's a continuous work. David coined the phrase in Psalms as deep calls out to deep. It's just this thing inside of you connecting with something bigger. From our soul to his. Right? And we're going to take a moment to practice this. But in your life, make this something you do daily and find a similar time to do it every day. Right? And a place to make it consistent. Right? For me, like I said, I do it every morning, and that's partly because I fill my life really quickly with things. If I don't do it first thing, then it's hard for me to always remember to squeeze it in. And I do it on my back porch area of my house because it's just a place I can go and hang out there. So find a consistent time and place. And maybe it's your favorite chair at your kitchen table or your desk. Maybe it's you drop off the kids and it's actually silent for the first time in 20 hours. And so you're just and you could take your time to be still. And then set a timer on your phone or something so that you're not how much time is left? How much time is left? How long am I sitting here for? And I think a good healthy play to start is about 5 hours. No, I was just kidding. Okay, and no, I would recommend 2 minutes because 2 minutes is just long enough when you start to be uncomfortable. And but also remember last week, pray as you can, not as you can't. And if we're going to practice 2 minutes today, and so you can set your benchmark from that. You can be that was the worst torture I've ever been in my life. Then maybe start a little bit less, somewhere. But start somewhere. And over time, add time. Don't let that be the only place. There was a moment when I worked at the House of Prayer full time. It was part of our routine of our day to sit for 30 minutes in silence. And there was days where it was it went by so fast and I felt so refreshed. And there was other days where I'm it's got to be 30 minutes and it's been 30 seconds. And, or days I just fell asleep, to be honest. And, but I know it's possible to add more time. Right? And again, don't focus on whether or not it's working or to get something out of it. Trust the process. Trust the practice that is from this ancient time of King David, that being still and knowing God will change things in your life. Right? Just as the same transaction we talked about last week of trading your anxiety through prayer to get peace doesn't really make sense in our world. But it's still a promise. It's still a practice that does work. But eventually this practice will become a lifeline, a kingdom you can't live without. Usually, from what I've read in this book and other things, they say come up with a simple phrase that means something to you, just to help you keep your mind. Like my mind wanders all the time. It wanders while I'm up here. It's just constantly thinking things. I can't get it to stop sometimes, and so being still is really hard for me. And so I have a phrase that I say is, Father or Dad or God, I belong to you, and you belong to me. And I say that, and I bring myself back to every time my mind wanders away. I'm like, oh, nope, sit in silence, being still. All right, we can do this. And I say that phrase to bring myself back to it. And so, I mean, I've seen Here I Am, Lord, or Come, Holy Spirit, or Lord, have mercy, Lord, have grace, or whatever means something to you. Just a short phrase, because it's not a time of you talking, but that just helps you kind of remind your body and your mind that this is what we're doing right now. You know, and I think you should find a posture that's comfortable for you, that reminds you that you're doing something different. You know, if you're like, I'm going to sit in 2 minutes of silence, and you get in bed, and you put the covers on, you lay down on the pillow. You know, I'm not quite sure if that's the same thing. And, right, that might be called napping and knowing he's a God. But, so, you know, sit up so that you're in a posture of like, I'm wanting something from God. I'm here to do something. Put your hands out like you're receiving something, you know, so that your body is in motion of like something is happening and you pull everything together. You know, I like to, when I'm struggling of calming down and doing this in my life, I start to think of those moments where I've overlooked the Grand Canyon or seen a giant mountain or looking over the ocean, you know, something that reminds me of my relationship with God and how small I am and how big he is. And I feel like that's where silence kind of starts, right? And then you can think of the God that created all of that is here and ready to meet with you right now, right? And that should pretty much leave you speechless for a while. So get into your posture, whatever it's going to be. We're going to do 2 hours right now. All right, you can wake up. Does that feel good on your soul? Was a little bit of a struggle. How many of you guys put into practice our prayers last week of just making time daily to pray as you can, not pray as you can't? Right? Now, what I encourage you is to start with this moment of silence like this, whatever time frame you need to start with for your life. And then talk to God about whatever is going on. Usually for me, it's the things that I'm fighting, that are racing through my head at the times that I'm trying to sit quiet, that I'm like, okay, God, I guess there's something I need to bring to you. But, man, I wish I could put into better words what it does for me and what it's done in my life and like the importance of it, of you doing it. Like I'm not just picking this series because I'm like, man, what are we going to talk about for the next, so many weeks? Like, this is literally something I believe like is life-changing, not just to you, life-changing to our church and to our communities around us if we can do this. So let me pray. I heard some stomachs gurgling, so you're probably hungry. But God, I just thank you so much. God, I'm blown away when I start to think of how great you are, how much bigger you are. And I'm blown away by my own ability to say, I'm probably the one that should be making the decisions around here. God, and I thank you that you're not mad at me for that, but you just call me back to you, God. That you call us all back to you. God, I'm blown away that you want to meet with us, that who are we, these humans, that you are mindful of us, that you are aware of us, and beyond that you want to spend time with us. God, I pray that thought alone would help us to take time to be still. Like, why would we not want to meet with you? There's nothing in our lives more important than this connection we can have with you. God, help us to see that. Help us to put aside the hurriness, the busyness of our lives, to find time to meet with you. God, I pray for all these people who put this into practice this next week, God, that you would pour out so much of you into them, God, that they would never be able to go a day without it again, because it's not real life unless I've connected with you at first, not unless you've poured your life into me. God, I pray that you would just come, that you would be so real to us today, God. And if we can't find a reason to turn to you, God, that we would just see the world around us and realize that is a higher power, that is something bigger than us going on. God, when we drive and we look up to the mountains, or we're traveling around, we see the massive amount of people or the stars in the sky at night, God, that we would be reminded of a God that wants to meet with us, of this God that we need to get his perspective on. God, we love you so much. We're so grateful for you. Thank you for meeting us here today. And go with us. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so go and make time to stop for God.